Okay. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Paul, and this is Ask Paul. And how many of you have seen the YouTube videos that I do? A couple? Oh, geez. Well, I often apologize to people's wives, but thank you for watching. That's really kind. I brought some questions. Are there people that have questions that? A couple. So I'll start off with one and then kind of get the ball rolling, and then I know you have a question, and then we can go from there. I have no actual, I never have a script. For those of you that are curious, when I do those videos, is that going to stay there? I donate one Saturday every 2 weeks, and I do 20 in a day. So I start about 8 o'clock in the morning and I get 10 done, then I go get lunch and then my 20-minute nap. I have taken a 20-minute nap every day of my life for the last 40 years, I think. It started out as meditation. I used to do TM, and after a while I thought, oh, screw this, I'm just going to... It's a nap, and for whatever reason, I just close my eyes, I go far, far away, and I come back within a minute of 20 minutes. I don't know, but it works for me. And then I go have a cup of coffee, and I do another 10. So that's the routine. Anyway, so I do my best to answer the questions without really thinking about it. In fact, when we first started Ask Paul series, we had envelopes. And I wasn't allowed to see the questions, and I would just open the envelopes up and read it. And oh my God, what is this? And answer it. Anyway, so this one comes from, I had 3 of them, but I think we'll just try the one. It comes from John in Quebec City, which I assume is in Canada. He says, I'm looking into adding high-res streaming like Tidal Masters to my system, and what would sound better? Using the Tidal desktop app through a Mac Mini and a decent DAC, or using a dedicated network player with Tidal built in? And so this is a question we get asked a lot, and the answer is pretty easy and pretty quick. And I try and do them kind of quick because I get all kinds of feedback from people going, you talk too much, why don't you get to the damned answer? So the answer is you're much better off not using the Tidal app. It really, and I'll explain why. So, and the same with Qobuz. So we're streaming Qobuz, which I prefer to Tidal, because I think that Qobuz sounds a bit better. In any case, we tried using their web app, and it plays nice, except it doesn't sound very good. In fact, when we were at the show, we just did a quick experiment. My wife, Terry, who is, I'll embarrass her, she's right back there. Stand up and say hi, Terry Ann. She saved me from, anybody who has read the book knows that that's the reason I'm still here. But, and she was in the listening session, and when you play it through the Mac Mini using the Tidal app, it sounds, I don't want to say oatmeal, but it just kind of puts a haze over the whole thing. And then if you go to and play it on Ottervana, or you play it on BitPerfect or any of the other programs, it sounds tremendously better. And so why is that? Well, one of the reasons that happens is that within the Mac and within Windows, there are a whole group of software-oriented devices inside there that they designed to make everything sound better. And I don't know how many Mac users are here, but if you ever listen through a Mac, you'll notice that no matter what you put in, it always comes out at the same sample rate. And they do that on purpose. And everything is sample rate converted. So you can set it to 192, and then when you play a 44.1, it comes out at 192. Or you can do the opposite. Doesn't matter. No matter what you put in, they make sure they squash it, sample rate it, clean it up, get it perfect so you don't have to think about anything, and you don't have to listen to high quality, because that's not their, I mean, these folks don't think like we do. So programs like Autorvana, BitPerfect, JRiver, I don't know, what am I missing here? Those kinds of programs, Rune, any of that, they circumvent that whole audio engine inside of the computer and just bypass it and go straight to the output so that it's bit perfect, which is how the Murrisons came up with the word bit perfect for their program, which is a great program. I think it's like $10. And those programs just basically circumvent that whole process and that whole chain. So the answer to this person's question is basically, yeah, don't use those apps because they rely on the internal sound card business within the computer. Does that make sense? I don't want to do that. Does anybody have a question? I've got 2 more here we can do. Okay, well, hold on. I've been instructed that you have to have a microphone. So somebody is getting off his ass, and here he is. All right, he's
that's
coming
me.
up.
Excuse me.
Okay.
On, I hope. Paul, when you came out with your new speaker system,
Yep.
what was the thought process behind putting in a powered woofer into these?
Okay. So everybody hear the question? When we did our new AN3 speaker, why did we go with a powered woofer? There's a couple of reasons. First off, my former partner and mentor, Arnie Nudell, who founded Infinity, always had powered woofers at any time. He didn't do it in their stock Infinity speakers, but anything that Arnie did that he could possibly afford to, whether it was the IRS, if it was the original Infinity, servo statics, always had powered woofers. And the reasons were, he had quite a few reasons, but I mean, I kind of learned off of that, and once I got into it and understood it, it made a lot of sense. So way back when, Arnie realized that, especially back in the day in the 60s and the 70s and 80s, amplifiers back then weren't really tailored as well as they are today to be as full range as we might want. They were mostly vacuum tubes. Vacuum tubes in power amplifiers where you have an output transformer. They're not great for bass. They're not as good as a lot of solid state amps that have high damping factor, good control over the woofer, and so it was always kind of a compromise. And there you want solid state. You really don't want vacuum tubes on the output stage when you're trying to deal with bass. But when you're dealing with tweeters and mid-ranges, there, the sweetness of a vacuum tube is really something that's very desirable. So he always said, he was a fan of tubes. And up until the time when we did BHK's amps, and all the years I ever knew Arnie, he never owned a solid state amp in his entire life. It was he had these big Sonic Frontier beasts at his house, but he was a bass freak. And he wanted to make sure that bass reached down into the basement and really just did it. Arnie was a big classical music fan, and I am as well. And if you're at a live classical music concert with a symphonic orchestra, if you get around that, the power that comes out of the woofers from a well-recorded piece, like a Mahler, like the Mahler third, holy crap, you hear that with the bass drum whacking on that thing and the double basses going. I mean, that's power, and you have to have that woofer working right. And in order to do that, you're going to have some high damping factor and really good power. So that's one big reason, to ensure that that woofer is going to work the way that you would demand it for that kind of music. Second reason is that Arnie was a big fan of servos for years, and I've always been a fan of servos. And in order to have a servo, it's really easiest to have the amplifier built in. So I know that like the IRS, were they the betas? I think it was the betas. Pretty sure it was the IRS betas. You had to supply your own amplifier, certainly the RS1s. And that was a real compromise. The servo systems weren't really done the right way. They were trying to save money with all that. So when we did Genesis, everything we did that we could, from the Gen 5s to the twos and the ones, they were, all had amplified enclosed systems. So going back to today on the new AN3s, one of the things that we always wanted to do that we were never able to do, Arnie never got it done at Infinity, and we never did it at Genesis, was to design a woofer that could not be outdone by a specific power amp. So in the AN3s, we've got a 700 watt amplifier built in. That's a lot of amp. And that sucker puts out a lot of voltage. So in any of the systems I used to do, we had to put hard limiters on it because the woofer could never take as much as the amplifier could output. And it would clip and blap and fart and make all kinds of terrible noises. So we had to put a hard limiter on it. And that just sounds kind of wimpy when it gets up to, up to full excursion. So Chris Brunhaver, who designed our system, said, well, I'm going to design a woofer very different than what you and Arnie used to do. Because Arnie loved cheap woofers. He would go out and buy the cheapest damn stamp frame woofer he could find that had good excursion, and then fix everything with the cheap woofer by the servo, which it did. I mean, it really did. But we wanted to take a completely different direction. So Chris says, I'm going to design a woofer, and if you go to our room, you'll see it sitting there. That thing is, pick it up. It's 50 pounds. It is a beast with cast frame, 3 magnets on it, 2 inches of excursion. And I mean, if you know woofers, you're lucky to get 3/4 of an inch. And this thing does 2 inches of excursion, and he designed it, and that's linear excursion, not maximum excursion. So go talk to Chris. He'll tell you all about the Faraday rings and all this crap that's in it. But it's good stuff. And so he wanted to make it so that the woofer exceeded the performance of the amplifier. So that amplifier can put out all 700 watts all day long, and the woofer just says, I can take it. And so that was really important to us to be able to do that. It's sort of a long-winded answer. I apologize. Anybody else? You have a question? Hold on. I know I could read, but they told me not to do that. And if you've read my book, I always follow the rules. And I never lie.
Given all of that information about the speaker, the new speaker, do you still recommend running a subwoofer with it?
With the AN3s? Oh, good God, no. No. That sucker goes down to like 18 hertz in the room. As many of you know, I'm a big advocate for subwoofers. And subwoofers are critical. I don't care what kind of speaker system you have. I don't care if you're from Britain. I mean, look, let's call it out. The British don't think a whole lot about bass. They kind of stay away from it. I mean, look at all their brands. But us Americans, we like our bass. And I certainly like it. I mean, to me, I want a full-range loudspeaker system. So if I'm going to have something that isn't full range, and unless you have a built-in subwoofer like what we're doing, and not just what we're doing, but there are others, of course, you need to add a subwoofer. You just do. Because if you ever hear a system that has a properly done subwoofer, you'll just never go back. And if you've heard my videos before, I'm preaching to the choir here probably, but the job of a subwoofer is to make the main speakers sound as if they had bass all the way down into the basement. If you hear the subwoofer, you've failed. So we don't want to hear the subwoofer. We want to integrate it seamlessly until it just sounds like the main speakers have this subterranean bass. I remember the first subwoofer I ever got. I had a pair of Acoustat and they were 4x4s. Is that what they were called? The big acoustic. Remember the Jim speakers, the big Acoustat electrostatic panels, and I had set a pair of them up. In fact, Terry gets mad at me when I tell some stories, but I had the damn things were like waterbed frames. They just wiggled around, and so I had on one Saturday when she was gone, I went down to the hardware store and I got these 2x4s and I mounted them to the side and then punched them into our walls in the living room with cleats. and hooked it up. And man, did that make a difference. I mean, that sucker had bass. And she walked in and just, yeah. Anyway, it didn't last long, but while it lasted, it was really amazing. I mean, it truly was. But I still needed a subwoofer, and at that time, subwoofers, there was no home theater. They just weren't around. And there was a company called M&K. You guys remember? That was Jonas Miller and Ken Kreisel. And they had one of the first subwoofers out there. And they did subwoofers because they did these three-way systems. You'd buy I forgot what they were called, but they had 2 satellites and a single sub, if you remember those systems. They were pretty bad systems. But that was the start. And so I bought one of those. I set it up, cranked it up, got good bass, but I could always hear it. And I kept turning it down and down, finally got it to seamlessly integrate. I looked over and it was completely off. True story. I thought, well, okay, I wish we had eBay back then. So we got rid of it and went about our way. But over time, I got to learn how to integrate subwoofers. And one of the cool things that we did with the AN3 is we've made it completely adjustable. It has more adjustments than Carter's got pills. So on the back, of course, you can turn the subwoofer level up and down. You've got, we have mid-bass couplers, which couple the top of the subwoofer and the bottom of the mid-range. And that's something that Arnie was really big on. Just before he passed, that was his big deal, was this mid-bass coupler to have a variable control on it to where you could control the chest feeling within music. Very important to couple those two things together. And if you hear our speakers, ask them to put on this one vinyl piece from the LA Jazz, Ron Carter on bass. You'll hear something I think few people have ever heard, just dynamics that are will make you fall off the chair. And that's due to those mid-bass couplers, which also have a 700 watt amp powering them, which we can talk about if you want. But in any case, you have those controls. And then we've come up with something really cool. Because most people have real lives in real homes, as all of us kind of do, we can't have the speakers out 5 feet, from the wall, right? I mean, when you go to our listening room in music rooms 1, 2, or 3, you'll see the speakers are pulled out because they're man caves. But in most people's homes, you're going to want the speakers shoved up against the wall or as far away as you can or whatever your spouse will allow. I mean, that's just reality. And Arnie and I bickered about this forever, but in any case. So what we've done is we have a control, a depth control on the back. So when you set these speakers up, you can put them up a foot, maybe 2 feet away from the rear wall, and then you adjust the knob on the back to the exact number of feet. And it fundamentally changes the crossover to compensate for how close it is to the wall. Because when we get close to the wall, the lower frequencies hit the wall and create this very different frequency response than if you were far away. And if you're far away, then we have this effect where you have great depth, where everything disappears and the sound is no longer attached to the speaker. So we have those controls on that too. Any other questions? Hang on. That was like The Price is Right or something.
Yeah,
It's
really.
like, what's your bid?
Huh?
No, I'm sorry.
Well, I've been doing this since the 70s, so remember the good old days. And I remember the IRS-5s and always lusted after them, but never could pay for them.
You're in Colorado, come by and see them.
So anyway, you were learning, you were talking about the adjustment and everything else. And we both know that because of the back wave and everything else, if you got it up against the wall, even though you do have the adjustment, are you still going to get the same depth?
No.
Yeah, there's just no way.
You'll get, with this control, you'll get, I think we can handle about 2 feet from the rear of the speaker. If you can afford 2 feet away from the wall, yes, we can get you very close to the amount of depth you'd have a third of the way into the room. But if you shove them up right up against the wall, I don't know how to do that. But 2 feet's not that bad. I mean, it's like 1, 2. That's like that far from the rear wall. If you can manage that, then we can get you very close in terms of depth and pulling the sound out of the speakers and getting it behind the speakers. Does that answer? Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say that you shove it right up against, but because it has a rear tweeter as well, and that we kind of depend on that rear tweeter too, so that helps. Any other questions? There's a twofer over there.
What is your opinion about DSP correction and other little kind of black magic gadgets like that?
For loudspeakers?
Yes, for loudspeakers.
Oh boy. Well, the snakes are coming around. We do pretty heavy DSP on our subwoofer. And I like DSP. I think it offers a lot of advantages. You have to have fairly fast processors because there's latency with a lot of DSP. So we have a very fast processor. We use it extensively on the bottom end. But anything above 100, 150 hertz or so, I stay away from it. I don't like it. And I particularly do not like, and here's where I'm going to step into the snake pit, I don't like room correction using loudspeakers and DSP. I think it is immoral. I just think there ought to be a law. Sorry? How do I really feel? Well, darling, I'll tell you. I just, you know, I've sat through so many demos, and, you know, head in a vise, you know, move over here or over here, and you take like a DIRAC system, if you've seen DIRAC live. In my home theater, I use it, because in the home theater, I'm not looking for, you know, what we have in 2-channel audio. But for 2-channel audio, taking care of the room problems through changing the frequency response of the speakers is just wrong. And I really, I don't like it. Now, in the bass, sometimes that's absolutely necessary. And there, it's really good. So I'm talking about, you know, upper frequencies. And if you're going to do it in the bass, one of the things I just can't get along with raising up nulls. I think that is wrong-headed. I don't mind taking down dips. I think that makes sense. But I've just never heard it. It's like one of those, you know, when we first started with power conditioners, you know, I got enamored with these passive power conditioners way back when George, anybody remember the Tice clock? Remember the Tice clock? And George Tice had these, you know, all these wonderful magic beans and things. I got into that, and we would plug our system into these like there was the MIT Z stabilizer and all of these products, and immediately there was like, wow, it's like blacker backgrounds, cleaner, and the more you listen, the more I discovered that it just robbed the life out of the system. So it was one of those things where it was kind of immediately cool and wonderful, and then you realized, I've been robbed. And which is how we wound up saying, well, that maybe we'll come up with a way like a regenerator that actually does the opposite effect, that actually adds life, you know, and that's how that all came to be. But so if that answers your question. Oh, sorry, you've been so patient.
Hi, Paul.
Hi.
So, question I have is, I noticed on the AN3 speaker that you use a ribbon tweeter. Is that right?
Uh-huh.
So, what was behind that choice? Because I know there's like, you know, the standard convex tweeter, and then there's the horn tweeters. There are probably also some convex tweeters. But what was behind the choice of the ribbon tweeter on the AN3?
Well, I've always been in love with the speed and dynamic snap of ribbons, especially planars. So, and these are a planar ribbon tweeters. Everybody understand the difference between a ribbon and a planar? I don't need any explanation on that. So these planar drivers are, because they're planars, they're very symmetrical in the way that it pushes and pulls. This one in particular is pretty cool because it uses no adhesive. It's a pretty tricky, yeah, they came up with a way of coming up with this diaphragm that isn't bound by any adhesive. So a lot of ribbons, I mean, people have, I was going to say, audiophiles have opinions. So I thought, that's going to sound really stupid. But we all have our opinions on how various things sound. Like some love horns, some love ribbons, some hate ribbons. And I think when it comes down to it, it's all in what you've experienced and how it was executed. So I've heard horrible ribbons. I've heard ribbons that will tear the top of your head off. And if that's all I'd ever listened to, I wouldn't like ribbons at all. But I first became enamored with coneless speakers. Well, you heard my story about the acoustats. I mean, I went from, remember the quads with the curved, I forgot what they were called, but the room divider. You remember what they were called? The quad, yeah, 57 was, yeah, that sounds about right. And I mean, they had a window-like quality that it's really hard to beat. I mean, when you, in that one range, they don't have any bass, they don't have any top end, but man, you know, where they work, they really work. And I just love the speed of that kind of driver. And then I moved on to electrostats because they had, you know, big panels. And of course, they have no dynamic range, and you have to hold your head in a vise. And they have to augment it with woofers, and they never match the speed, you know. But, you know, so you go through this whole thing. And when I first got introduced to ribbons, first through magnaplaners, and then Arnie's ribbons with the IRS. I mean, the IRS-5 is the single most dynamic loudspeaker I've ever heard in my life. If anybody's ever, I gotta tell you, 132 drivers all working together at the same time, that thing is never challenged. I don't care what you play on there. Peter, what's the guy with Wilson? Peter McGrath, thank you. He also does a lot of recordings, and I have something I probably shouldn't have, which is a recording that Peter made of the, I think it was the Florida Symphony Orchestra, and it's the Corleano, I think it's Corleano, Symphony No. 1. It was a tribute to an AIDS thing, and if you've ever heard that symphony, not many people have, you know, all the pain of the suffering, and then this orchestra comes in, and I've never heard anything that dynamic. I mean, it's just an explosion that happens, and on every speaker system I've ever listened to it on, it's kind of like, you hear it on the IRS, it just washes over you like a wave. And those dynamics are all from ribbons. So a properly done ribbon is able to be quick, dynamic, and those are the things that really interest me. And I don't think I would choose anything other than ribbons, because I don't want to compromise. I mean, one of the reasons we got in speakers in the first place is because I have so much trouble. When people call up and say, what should I hook up? What kind of speakers should I get for your electronics? I have really struggled with that. There are, you know, every speaker has its compromises, and for my tastes, you know, I wanted to create something that was just put a smile on my face every time we played it, that presented itself like the IRS-5, which is why we got into making speakers, so we can do that. How are we doing on time? Are we okay? Oh. How long is this supposed to go? Is it an hour? Yeah. No one knows? Yeah? Okay. Huh? 1 o'clock. Oh, God. Oh, you.
Hey, my question's about DACs.
Okay.
DACs seem to be an improving or developing technology.
Yep.
My question is, how is it that the DACs of today are better than the DACs of a few years ago? And how is it that the DACs of a few years from now will improve upon the DACs of today?
Wow. Well, that's a good question. DACs are interesting. I would have to answer that with a couple of directions. In a couple of directions. First off, most DACs use DAC chips, right? So analog devices, TI, Cirrus Logic, they all make DAC chips. And you can pick your whatever DAC chip you want, pick that DAC chip, and we can make that DAC chip sound as different as night and day with the exact same software running in the chip by virtue of the output stage. So DACs mostly sound different because of the output stage. And not many people really kind of get that, because we, as manufacturers, we like to talk about, you know, we have 192 this and all these fancy, you know, things that go right over people's heads they don't really quite understand. And it's a lot of, you know, marketing BS. It's not really important. I mean, some of the best sounding DACs I've ever heard were suck. They were terrible little chips. Like, do you know Mod Wright? You know Dan Wright? One of the best DACs I ever heard. Dan Wright, Arnie owned it, and we tried to beat it with DirectStream at first and couldn't. I mean, and that thing used an ancient old DAC. I forgot what it used now, but it was an ancient old chip that most manufacturers would be embarrassed to add, and it was like a $10. Sorry. Oh, yeah, I don't remember what it was, but it was nothing. Yet it was one of the best sounding DACs I've ever heard in my life. And the reason is because Dan put all his time and energy into the output stage, into the power supply, into everything that took the analog and made it something listenable. And when we first started getting involved with Ted Smith, I don't know if I've told this story before, but when I first met Ted Smith, Gus Skinnis, who is doing, we're starting a new label, which if you guys want, when you come over to the room, ask us and we'll play you some stuff from Octave Records that we're getting started, pretty cool stuff that Gus has recorded at our studio. And Terry and I were going out to dinner and walking out the front door, and Gus zooms up in his little Prius and says, "You got to come over to the studio right now, right now." And poor Terry, she just goes, "Oh my God. All right, I'll meet you at the restaurant, don't be late." And she walked off, and I hopped in the car with Gus and went over, and I said, "What?" And he goes, "You got to meet this guy. He's really weird, but he's a genius." And so I walk in. I don't know if you guys know Ted Smith, but he's a, God, how do you describe Ted? Long beard. He looks like a gnome. I mean, he always wears shorts. I don't think he owns a pair of long pants. Seriously, he used to be in Boulder, and he's barefoot or flip-flopped, even in the snow. That man never, I don't even think he owns a coat. He's a great guy. I mean, and he always talks over, I can't understand half the stuff he talks about. He was, you know, software engineer at Microsoft and Apple and Google. Anyway, so Gus said, you have to hear this. And we sat down in his mastering lab, and he put on something that they had mastered. And I thought, yeah, okay, that sounds great. And he goes, now, he clicked the thing, now listen to that. And I said, it sounds identical. And he goes, yes, that's the point. And I looked over, and here's Ted, had this giant board hooked up with a toss link through a $15 little adapter that took Toslink over to SPDIF. I mean, it was a ridiculous setup on this big board, and yet it sounded the same as the original equipment that mastered that piece. And I was, holy crap, what is this? And he goes, it's a DAC, but it's different than any DAC you've ever, you know, and we went on. But one of the keys to this DAC that we eventually wound up calling DirectStream, which as many of you know is FPGA based, which is a field programmable gate array. But while he can do tons of magic, and we always come up with new, we give you a new DAC about every 6 months with our updates, which is kind of fun, which is really cool, because we can change fundamentally the way the DAC sounds by changing the software, which we do for free for people, which is kind of cool. But the real key to that DAC, other than the things that we do in there, is the output stage. Because that DAC is 100% DSD, the output stage is as simple as it gets. So I don't know how many of you know this, but DSD, which is pulse density modulation, as opposed to pulse code modulation, which is what most of us listen to, doesn't require a converter to turn it into analog. So in a standard DAC that uses PCM, pulse code modulation, if you look at the stream, you can't see anything as far as music. It's just a blur of bits, right? Because it's coded, and you need a magic decoder ring to undecode it, to unencrypt it, and so go through this long process with ladders and switches and all that. But DSD, you can take the output of the digital output of DSD and put it directly into a power amplifier and hear music. And you can actually see it on a scope. You can, and I think we've shown some things on our website. So TED's output stage is really pretty simple. It's the DSD output going through some really fast switches that raise its level up, and then a filter and out. And it's just a simple analog filter. And so all of that goes into why that DAC sounds the way it does. So it's mostly the output stage. But I don't want to have everybody fall asleep here. I can go on for a long time, but I don't know I mean, there's plenty of other stuff. It's, things like jitter and noise. There's plenty to do with, people say, well, wait a minute, how can the signal, a digital signal doesn't matter? But if I plug this cable in or that cable in, it makes all this difference. Well, a lot of what you're hearing is noise, right? So something like USB has a lot more noise coming in from the connected device if you don't treat it properly than, say, a coax or what we use is I2S. So that noise gets into the system, jitters the power supply, and you hear that difference. So much of what you can do is implementing the way the signals come in, how you isolate the ground. Like Ted's new DAC, which we call Obsidian, the Ted Smith signature DAC, every input is completely isolated, galvanically isolated from all the grounds and all of the system. So that no matter what cables you use or however you hook it up, it should sound very much the same, which no one's really addressed. So again, I could go on for hours, but the basic thing is the way you do the output stage. Yep. Hang on. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Hi. I'm lucky enough to have one of your direct stream DACs.
Oh, thank you.
So riffing on that, I was curious whether, since I understand it converts everything to high-speed DSD that comes in, is there an advantage to a DSD source over PCM or anything else? Do you hear the difference?
I do, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have to say I'm a big fan of DSD. Our whole studio is based on DSD. We don't even have a PCM recorder or any ability to. In fact, we should put a sign out in front. It's like, no PCM here. Gus has a huge machine, I forgot what it's called, down in the server room, that he will begrudgingly convert DSD to PCM when we have to make a CD or something. And he makes some of the best transfers over to PCM that I've ever heard, which is pretty cool. But I think fundamentally DSD is a far better audible format than PCM. And I'm a very big fan of it. Again, anybody that wants to come and visit us, I highly encourage you. You'll get upstairs and you'll meet Gus. And one of the highlights of the factory tour is meeting Gus, and he will play for you masters that he has. I mean, and this guy has mastered, you name it, he's mastered it. Pink Floyd. He's working on a new surround for Pink Floyd right now, where anyways, I mean, just, you name it, he's got it. And you ask him, well, can you play some of that? And, oh, yeah, I got the original master right here. And you actually get to hear the masters in DSD on that system up there, which is really a treat. So I would highly encourage you if you do have a chance to come.
Thanks. Along those same lines about DACs and everything like that, you over in your other room, you do have a demo or a mock-up of the new Obsidian coming out.
Yep.
What can you talk about, what are you allowed to talk about that product and how that is a departure and similarities to what you're currently offering?
Yeah, well, it's, oh boy. Well, it's very similar in architecture. So the architecture is pretty much the same. It's a bigger FPGA. Ted has spent the last couple of years writing this whole new structure for the DAC that he's quite proud of, but it would never fit on a current direct stream FPGA. So this has got Xilinx, who happens to be right down the street from us, which is kind of cool. They make these FPGAs, and he's gone up to, I forgot the name of it, but it's quite a bit larger. It's about twice the size of the FPGA. So but it's the same basic structure and architecture, just he's done some pretty cool things. The biggest differences that you'll see is that he has gone to 2 chassis. So when you see Obsidian in our room, you'll see 2 chassis. Well, one chassis is all digital, the other is all analog.
So you removed your output stage
to a whole separate chassis, exactly. And Ted is, well, I'm in mixed company. He's adamant that no contamination of digital be inside of the analog at all, to the point where we have this big glass screen on the front, and we want to be able to let you see inside because there's some biasing LEDs in there, and it kind of looks kind of cool. And we had to design a mesh grill on the front, kind of like you see on the front of a microwave. If you look through the window, there's sort of that mesh grill, and that's tuned so that those microwaves don't get out. We had to do the same thing so nothing gets in, because as soon as Ted saw that we had glass on the front panel, he's like, not in my DAC. And so we had to, calm down and I saw our director of engineering was just here, but he left. Oh well. Anyway, and everybody was pulling their hair out, but we came up with a solution to do that. So the whole thing is connected through fiber. Yep. So Ted found this very cool fiber optic that is it comes with a little tool, and you can run this thing 300 feet, 400 feet, and then you can terminate it yourself and put on this cheap little connector and pop it in. It's pretty cool. So you can get your own length. We'll sell it, when we sell it with a length, but then you can buy from us as much as you want. So you could literally put one in one room. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you could, and the analog stage in the other room. And it all connects up for a very long way through fiber. So that's a big difference.
Will that also be user updatable like your current?
Oh yeah. Yep. So someday, DirectStream will have a hardware change where we'll go to the bigger FPGA. Probably not in 2020, probably 21, 22. We're certainly not working on it now, but someday we'll try and get that larger or a larger FPGA so that we can share the same architecture. It obviously won't sound the same, but yeah, because that's become part of our culture of taking care of our customers, of trying to have updates that we can fundamentally change how your DAC sounds and performs as we learn more, and as Ted has his next brainstorm. The gentleman has a question.
Well, the follow-up question you knew was coming about the mid-ranges and powering the mid-ranges.
Which is, I'm sorry.
It's kind of the same reason behind what was going on to allow that more flexibility, or
the way we did the coax?
Yeah.
Well, so the coax. So if you've seen the new AN3s, they're very different than the old AN3s, the original prototypes, in that in the original one we used a Bollinger-Graebner Neo 10 mid-range, and we used a folded ribbon tweeter atop of it. So it was a classic four-way loudspeaker with separate tweeter, mid-range, and then a mid-bass coupler. When we brought Chris Brunhaver on, and which is a whole good story in itself of how we found Chris. But Chris came in and just looked at the AN3 and he said, this is good, but if I'm going to be on the team, we got to start from scratch. And I thought, oh my God. So that was, you know, I'm used to it now because I work with engineers. We have a fairly large engineering team. It's got to be 15, 16 people on it. And engineers are more opinionated than audiophiles, believe it or not. And it's like herding cats. So, but you know, you got to trust your people. And so Chris came in and said, we're getting rid of all of that. And I'm really glad he did. And one of the things that he knows that I am enamored with is coherency. I just, you know, if I could make a point source loudspeaker, I'd be the first person to jump on that ship. I don't think it's possible, but if you could. So when he came up with the idea of a coaxial that was pretty bold, I just loved the idea. And in order to do that, we didn't want to have two different types of drivers. So when he designed that, he wanted to have two planars that were of the same ilk, if you will. So that's how that came to be, and we made a very special case for it. We've worked a lot on the amount of damping behind it. It's pretty much a pretty cool work of art. But again, go listen. When you listen to that speaker, pay particular attention to the coherency. It's because speakers that have tweeter, mid-range, woofer, you know, kind of in a line, at some point, and you'll hear it in the music, it gets discombobulated. It gets, you can hear it at certain frequencies where you're crossing over between the two. And a lot of companies have done coaxial drivers. Like at home, we have a pair of LS50s, the KEF speakers, and those use a little coax. And they're really quite coherent. So that was one of the reasons we did that. A question from the internet. Wow.
So the question is from the true voice of reason.
Oh, God. I know that guy.
So how can a manufacturer call a device a preamp when it doesn't amplify and is only a source switch and a volume pot, such as the Bellari PP532 stereo passive audiophile preamp?
Wow. That is a cool question. That's all the way from the internet? Damn. Well, I suppose technically you can't. We used to call that a pots in a box. Years ago when we first started PS Audio, Stan and I only made a phono stage, and we figured we'd make our fortunes just selling $59 phono stages to audiophiles. And after we sold a couple thousand of them, you know, we realized we weren't even able to meet rent, let alone, you know, make a fortune at it. So then people started saying, well, you make a phono preamp, you got to make a preamp, because I need to turn the volume up and down. And neither Stan or I wanted to violate the purity of that phono preamp, because we had never listened to it through a preamp, our phono stage. We had always listened to it just through a pot. And we just had a Noble or an Alps pot, because our phono stage had quite a bit of gain. So we just hooked ours into a pot, and that went directly into the power amp. So Stan said, well, then that's what they want. Let's sell them a damn box with a pot in it and call it a preamp. And well, I don't know that we can do that. So we argued about this forever and finally compromised. And so if you've ever seen the Linear Control Center, the LCC, which we have in our little museum, that's how that came to be. And we have a little switch on it. We used to call it the Paul switch. So when you put it in one position, you got Paul's 20 dB of gain. It had an actual stage inside of it. And when you put it in the stand position, it was completely passive. And of course, Stan was right. In the passive position, it sounded better. It didn't have as much bottom end as it should, but we called that a preamp, and that was sort of okay because it did both, right? but a pots in a box switch, which our internet person was asking about, I would still call that a preamp, only because I'm old and it's too many names going on in that. But technically he's right. It does not amplify. It only controls the volume and the source selector. So, got any more of them internet questions? Anybody else have a question?
I think you've already covered this, but
okay.
There's the guy in Princeton that designed that Bach 3D sound processing system. You put the little
yes.
microphones in your ears and let it adjust to position.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Is it similar to the
No,
DSP
no. That I would take a completely different. So what I have never experienced it, but Richard Murrison, who writes for we have a magazine called Copper, which is a free magazine people get. Good magazine, comes out every 2 weeks. You ought to sign up for it. It's really cool. But Richard Murrison does a column in there, and he went to Princeton and met with the guy and said it was the most amazing experience. And I trust Richard's ears. I mean, he can hear, and totally blew him away. They model your ear. They put these devices in your ear, and you can. It enables you to all of a sudden really hear what we all hope to get to someday in two-channel audio. Because, I mean, let's face it, two-channel audio is a cool illusion, but we are very far away from live. I mean, I don't know. Once in a while, you know, for a half second, I'll have the lights low and I'll have my eyes closed and like, wow, damn, that sounded like that was in the room. But that's not the norm for me. I don't really think Dave Brubeck's in my room. But this guy in Princeton has actually created something that allows that to happen to where you can't tell the difference between live and recorded. And he's addressed one of the fundamental problems that we have. And it's a problem I've thought a great deal about over the years. And that is that you're in a live situation, if you're sitting in a concert, everything affects the entire performance. The person coughing next to you, as you turn your head, the angle of reverb changes, the position. I mean, everything, you know, and I always use this as an example, and I've done it a couple of times when Terry and I went to Carnegie or we went to the Met in New York. I would close my eyes for a moment, and I mean, you can do it if I stop babbling for a second, and if you just close your eyes and listen for just a sec, you know you are in a live space. You know you are not in your listening room, right? I mean, try it just for 1 sec. We'll hold a little prayer vigil here for 1 sec. Just close your eyes and just listen. Now I hear the air conditioning. I hear the people around me. I hear voices outside, and the more I listen, the more I know. I can almost tell that I'm in a big-ass room, right? Now, if I record that, and I go to my little-ass room, and I turn it on, I don't think I'm in this room. And he has solved one of those problems. And the way he solved it is, I mean, it's totally impractical. The device measures your head movement, and it changes these FIR filters in accordance with your head movement, how you're leaning this way or that way, if you move at all. And that's a pretty complicated system. One of the things that I came up with that I've always loved to do was to make an active room. And this is one of those, you know, I do these thought problems because I get bored easy. The room I designed in my head was all active walls. And in the room, there's a microphone that's picking up all the ambient noise and the cues. And the walls are actually loudspeakers of some, like those Next or something, those like a bending wave over at, we call them gerbils, but the Gerbil speakers, which are great speakers, by the way. But using that kind of technology and make the walls live. And if you did that, and then you went in, let's say, into Carnegie Hall, and you put your microphone, and you had these, you can record. I could, if I wanted to, record this room, and there's ways you can measure it and record it, and then by means of bouncing sound, so that anytime you make a sound in Carnegie Hall, you know you're in a big room. So you could do that in your active room with your microphone. So as I click on Carnegie Hall, all of a sudden, I could close my eyes, and I would actually be in Carnegie Hall, which would be kind of cool. Now, if I play my stereo system, I'm playing it in Carnegie. And that would be a very different experience than any of us have ever had. So that's why I say a lot that I think two-channel audio has a long, long way to go. We are not even close. So that's all I got to say about that. Anybody else? Hang on, there's, where's me runner? We lost the microphone? Yeah. He's a marketing guy. You know, they kind of fall asleep real easy.
So what do you see happening with the evolution of the AN3 from this prototype you have now to in the near future?
Of that particular model?
That speaker, yes.
Oh, I think it's pretty close to being done. I would put it at about 90% in terms. We have a whole bunch more internal decisions. We have to make it more customer friendly to set it up. So I don't know how many of you have actually seen what the changes we made, but we figured out pretty quick that the speaker we had, the original prototype, would be near impossible to get it to your house except on a pallet and a truck. And we didn't want to do that because we have customers all over the world. Customers want to take this stuff home and be able to set it up. So Chris came up with the idea of cutting it in half and making it into two separate boxes. Each weighs about 80 pounds, and there's handles on the side. So if you order a set of AN3s, they'll come in 5 boxes, and they come FedEx, which is kind of cool. You don't have to have this truck show up and have somebody at the door. You know, I mean, you can have an entire big speaker like that show up at your door, and then you just unbox it, pull it out, set it where you want, set the top one on there, slap the sides on, and you're playing music. So I don't see a whole lot more evolution on the AN3, and we hope to have it out in January. So now it's a matter of straightening out those details, getting it, you know, more customer friendly. I've got to figure out a way, because I want people to be able to just buy it from us, take it home, set it up, and have it work. That's my goal. And that's a really hard thing to do with loudspeakers, because so much is involved in setup, right? I mean, the setup is 70% of how you present a loudspeaker. I can walk into most people's homes and, you know, give me 5 minutes, and I can fix it up, and it'll sound great. Not because I'm such an expert, but just because, you know, I know over the years of doing this long enough what kind of setup problems people have. So part of our challenge that we're going to be working on is how do we have you do that? And I think it's going to be a combination of, it'll come with a CD, and we'll have very specific instructions, you know, to set it up, play this track. Now, you know, you should be hearing a voice, and it should be behind the speaker, and blah, 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 and some setup stuff. And I think that'll be really helpful. And then, of course, it has a ton of controls in the back that'll make it easy to set up. So all those things have to get going before they get out the door. The real evolution that I'm excited with our speakers is from there, that's the AN3, and that's our pivot speaker. So from there, we're going to go down market. So the Stellar series will have 3 speakers in Stellar that'll range from 3,000 to 4,000 a pair up to about 10,000 a pair. And those are really exciting. Those, to me, that's where we're going to find a lot of people that can really, all of a sudden, afford to have a speaker that they've never been able to have in their house before, ever. And that, to me, is even though I love the AN3, that's more exciting to me because I'm basically a cheap guy. How are we? Oh, yeah, we should. Anybody else have, like, we'll do what's that? 15 minutes. That's the retail on the thing. And we can, I mean, I can see some yawns and stuff, so we can, well, let's have another question or two, and then we'll go have a beer. We need beer.
So Paul, you talked about integrating a sub, and what's your best method for doing that? Do you use, analysis software? Do you do it just strictly by ear? And also compare the difference of integrating that sub with a box speaker versus a planar speaker for me.
Okay. Well, as far as integrating a subwoofer, there are a couple of tricks that I think are, I'll share with you. I don't use equipment to do it. I do it all by ear. Well, if you have a separate subwoofer, so let's start with some of the simple stuff. Part of the problem with subs, and I do believe in stereo subs, so I don't like mono subs. I think you should have a stereo sub. But part of it is, where do you place it? So typically, I start behind the loudspeaker and sort of off to the right or off to the left side. But a lot of times, that's not such a great place to put it. And when you sit down in your listening chair, if you're in a null or if you're in a bump, that can be tough. So one of the tricks that you do is you take that subwoofer or your pair of subwoofers and you actually put those subwoofers in your listening position. And you point them at the speakers and you turn them on with some long cords. Now what you do is you start playing music or tones. You can put pink noise or whatever you want, but walk around the room near your loudspeakers and find where the best bass is at the speaker position. And if you think about that, what you've done is just reverse engineered the whole thing, right? So if your speaker is here and you've got your subwoofer on the listening chair pointing towards the speakers and you're playing, like a Jennifer Warren's, we use that a lot, off her Raincoat album. And you find a place where you're out of the null, you're out of the peak, and wow, bass sounds really awesome here. Now take the subwoofer and put it there. Then when you go back to your listening position, it'll sound identical because you've just figured out the null. So that's a real easy trick that you can do that works really well to get the perfect spot for your subwoofer. But more important than that is how you connect it. So I am a big fan of connecting up the output of the power amplifier to the high-level input of your sub. I'm not and I catch a lot of flack for this, but John Hunter, who owns Rel Subwoofers, and I are two of the mavericks out there that really believe this. Most people say, oh, no, take the output from the preamp. And no, you want the sound of your power amplifier, whatever it's doing, you want that duplicated through your sub. So take the output of your power amplifier, go into the high-level input of your subwoofer, and that will help integrate it with your basic system a heck of a lot better. Not all subs have high-level inputs. So my advice is, don't buy a sub that doesn't have a high-level input. And if you already have one, well, there's eBay, there's Audiogon, there's us. We take trades. You can trade your subwoofer in with us. Time for one last. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't. Yeah, no. Planars are tougher because most subwoofers are slow. They're relative to a planar. So the only advice I can give you is find one that's a fast sub. I like Rel's, the old subs that I helped design, the Martin Logan Descents. Those were great. They were servo controlled. They were really fast and really easy to integrate. If you can find a used pair of Martin Logan Descents out there or a pair of Rel subs, they're excellent. They're fast. Those are good ways. Keep it low. Keep the low pass filter, which is how high the subwoofer goes. Keep that as low as you can. I mean, and don't roll off the bottom of your planar. Just let it go as low as it goes, and then keep turning it up to where you hear it, and then click back so the low pass filter is low. So you're just handling, the low frequencies. Well, I think this, okay. Okay, if it's quick.
Do you think they'll ever have some sort of equivalent technology where you use a servo and a woofer, or you would have something like that in a tweeter?
No. I think that is, you know, a servo system is, by its very nature, is a feedback system. And I think it'd be really hard. I mean, I could imagine some kind of fancy laser-based setup where you know, if you shot a laser at it and were able to record instantly what's going on. But tweeters don't really have the same problems that woofers do. Woofers are heavy and slow, and so tweeters don't have a lot of distortion. And I wouldn't worry so much about that. And it's a great thought. I mean, I would love to have some kind of active feedback to know that the drivers, because drivers are bad. I mean, look what we tolerate. In our systems, you know, we get jiggy if an amplifier is less than 1/10 of a dB out of spec, right? But a loudspeaker, you're lucky to get 3 dB. You know, I mean, most loudspeakers vary about 5 dB, 6 dB over their entire range. If that was in an amplifier, you'd never allow that. So I'd like it, but I don't see how to do it. So you had one question real quick, and then we can, even if we're running out of time, we can screw them. All right, last one.
Okay, I think I saw a post where you talked about a PS Audio server.
Mm-hmm.
Are you ready to talk about that?
Sure,
No?
I can talk about that real quick. It's the single longest engineering project in PS Audio's history. God bless America. So it's really a difficult problem. It'll be called Octave. We have every intention of stringing somebody up by their bootstraps if it isn't out by, say, November or December in terms of beta testing it. Probably launching a little bit later. So the hardest part, I'll just try and make it quick. The hardest part of a server is twofold. One, and by far the hardest part of a server, is the human interface. So our friends at Roon have done a terrific job. They have, in my opinion, the best human interface out there. It's really cool. And that's all metadata based. They've worked really hard. And so we've been working, because if we're going to do a server, it's going to be as good as Roon. It's going to be, well, we hope better. But it's that human interface that we've been working on for 2 or 3 years now. How to get the metadata, how to match it properly so it isn't goofy. You know, when you type in Beatles the, and you come up with James Taylor. You know, I mean, you think about this stuff. I've learned so much over all this time about what is possible. We use fuzzy logic, because at the end of the day, you know, you got 10,000 tracks, and it's a machine trying to figure out when you say, and you can't type, and you say, I want to hear Gillian Welch, and you know, you get Lawrence Welk, right? I mean, the machine is just, it doesn't know. 5 minutes, okay. What happens if I go over? Do I get shot? He says yes, okay. All right, I get shot. And the second problem that's probably more interesting is the hardware. And servers all sound different. And the reason that they sound different is, well, I mean, we could talk for an hour on that. But essentially, it has to do with noise, both radiated and electrical noise. So a server is a computer. At the end of the day, any server, I don't care what, an render, whatever it is, it's a computer and it's running Linux or it's running some kind of operating system. And then it's got some kind of drive or some means of getting data in from the outside. And then we're going to try and hook the output of that to this computer, this noisy computer, into a DAC. And as we had talked earlier, noise is deadly. Noise is the biggest enemy. It's why when we make simple little changes to the GUI on the input, it changes the sound. It's because the CPU is running differently. It's affecting the power supply differently. So what we did is we set a goal to have that not happen. So inside of Octave, there's a little cage where we call it an SBC, the single board computer that we use, which is this really cool Intel thingy-bob, but it doesn't matter because that's irrelevant. What's relevant is that doesn't interfere with the output stage. So we have what we call a digital lens at the output, and these are connected through not even fiber. We've got this light beam inside that there's no physical connection. It's like a little laser that goes across and through this. I forget, we come up with some fancy name for it, but it has no physical connection, and the data goes through there, and then this has its own power supply. It's completely shielded, and that's the key to why the Octave server, aside from its human interface, is going to be, I think, is going to be the best sounding server out there. Not because we have a fancy computer, but because we disconnected the computer physically and electrically from the digital lens. So, all right, I think we're done. I don't want to get shot. Thank you. I appreciate you coming.